Hi, are any of the tour guides available?
Oh yeah, she's checking out the costume.
Oh, okay, because I have someone that would like to
Hi.
take a tour. Okay.
So this is the property that the Olivas own, right?
Yes,
Was it only this small?
I'm
Is
sorry?
Is it only this size? I heard that it was bigger. Was it bigger though in the past?
Oh, well, they had, the building itself wasn't.
The building.
But the property they owned was much bigger. Yeah.
Because they also own the farm.
And they probably
right?
had outbuildings and such.
I see.
was the property of Raimundo and Teodora Olivas. So we call it the Olivas Adobe because it's made out of adobe bricks. But when they lived here, it was Rancho San Miguel. And they raised cattle here, and so Raimundo was born in Los Angeles in 1809 when Los Angeles was a small little place of 400 people. And he joined the Mexican army, and he was stationed up in Santa Barbara. So when he was ready to retire, then he and his friend Felipe Lorenzano applied for a land grant. And so they were given almost 5,000 acres. And when you got a land grant, you had to promise to do 3 things. You had to raise cattle, build a house, and raise crops. And so they did that. And when he was in Santa Barbara, he met his wife, Teodora. And when they got the land grant, he got a title. He was Don Raimundo, she was Doña Teodora. And they went on to build this big house, and they had 21 children. So let's go into the sewing. You're probably not too tall.
I'm not too tall. Wow, but this is so, how come it's so low?
When the city got the property, the floors were uneven. The upper side of the house was at a higher level. And they wanted the floors to be even. So when they got here, they cut off the door. You can see how low the handle is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see. So it should be a lot, the floor.
Right, the floor was down
a lot
quite
lower.
A bit.
I see.
So they had to be self-sufficient here. So we have a spinning wheel and a loom, and we have several sewing machines that are operated by foot because electricity didn't come to Ventura until 1912.
Was it very cold here?
So we have a picture of President Lincoln here to give you an idea of the time frame that we have this house furnished. We have the house furnished as if a wealthy family was living here between 1860 and 1880. So the furniture and the things that we have been donated, or the docent program has purchased them.
I see. So they're not the original.
We have a few things that belong to the family, but most everything has been donated or purchased to make it look like a wealthy family lived here between 1860 and 1880. Now, the history, of course, is they came down in 1847. So, and then they built that first structure, that single story that we could see outside. Eventually, as they got money, they built this large 2-story. So say we have a typical dress here of the 1860s. This furniture, this is called a fainting couch, and this is called a laying out couch. So Don Raimundo was very active in getting the Republican Party started, so very likely he voted for President Lincoln. So that's why President Lincoln never came here, but that kind of gives you the history where, the time frame we're talking about. These people are the Ortegas. And they were a family that lived over on the west side of town and started the Ortega chili. I don't know. We still have Ortega chilies in the store. So let's come out again. So that would be the front of the house, so visitors would come in from there.
So this is like a living room.
And this is like the living room, they called it the sala. This piano is from the 1850s, and the family that gave us that, the Hill family gave us that piano. That piano came around Cape Horn to get to California, so it's from the 1850s.
Where's Cape Horn?
That's the tip of South America.
Wow.
Because ships at that point, there was no Panama Canal. Ships had to go all the way around. So this is a picture of Doña Teodora, and all the pictures are family members. I mentioned there were 21 children, and this is Rebecca, the youngest of the 21 children, and her husband William de la Riva. And the other pictures then are also family members. Don Raimundo was a very good businessman. We could imagine him sitting here thinking about the inventory of how many cattle he was buying and selling. He spoke English and Spanish and several Chumash Indian dialects, because the Chumash Indians were the original people here in California. So the family was very musical. They probably all could play some kind of.
But this is like what? This is a piano too?
This is an old organ.
Organ, okay.
So one time, Don Raimundo, they were raising cattle, and they would take the hides and load them on a cart and take them up to Santa Barbara. And then they'd barter. There wasn't a money system at that time. They would, trade. So one time he came home with this barrel piano. Now this actually did belong to the family, and I'll play it for you. It plays 8 tunes. One of them is O Susanna.
I can't tell though. I can't tell though. Oh, this is one of the tunes.
Yeah,
that you
it
just
plays
said.
8.
Okay. Wow.
And I don't know the name of this one, but one that it does play is O Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama, banjo on my knee. This is a craft of the 1860s. It's made out of hair. And that was very typical. This was a craft. But often women would make their husbands' pocket watch chains out of hair.
Out of hair? Did they have to treat the hair first?
I'm sorry.
Did they have to do some kind of treatment first?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, that was back in 1860.
Asking a question that you can answer.
Let's see.
Okay.
There is the Stratford. Not this one, but someone came to visit and wrote about the fact that they had a stove.
Oh.
So you can see that they would have, hung and stored food and then prepared food. That is called a pie safe. It's the closest thing to a refrigerator. This is an old bathtub. They did not have running water, so they would have to, have water in a container. This was a type of washing machine. And this is called a mano and a metate, and it was used for grinding corn.
Yep. We have that too in China. But we have, but they have a different name for that. Yeah.
So the
Is this all in Spanish or? Oh, this is donation or original?
oh no, this is all donation or
Donation.
purchased. I pointed out the barrel piano, and I'll point out a couple of other things. We only have a very few items that actually belong to the family. And no, this is in English.
What happened to all the other items that belong to the family? Did they get
Yeah,
sold?
well, we're talking
or-
about 1899 when the property was sold by the first family. There were there were 21 children, but you know, just like any family, they dispersed. The things that we have were given to us by the youngest, Rebecca.
Oh, I see.
And Rebecca, we know that Rebecca had a swing in the kitchen, and so we made this as a replica.
I see.
And so Rebecca, the youngest child, she and her family came to live with Doña Teodora at the end in the 1890s. And so at that point, she had to work in the kitchen. As a young child, there were Chumash Indians that were helping with everything. So she probably didn't have many chores to do. But when she was older and lived with Doña Teodora, then she was working in the kitchen. And just like mothers today would have young children with them in the kitchen, then she would. These are old irons that you would heat on the stove and then do that. So we'll go upstairs now to the children's room.
So upstairs are all bedrooms.
No,
No?
there were
Mm-hmm.
13 boys and 8 girls.
She has a handful.
And we think that the boys slept outside
Step outside?
here on the porch.
Let me see.
There are 2 doors, so they would have come in that door and then out. And we did have pictures that showed an enclosure there.
I see.
So there's a spread of ages with 21 children. So they weren't all young children at the same time. So the older ones
We'll have
would
to
have
take care of the
married
younger
and
one.
left
Oh,
when there were younger children. We know that they had a Chumash Indian that worked for them. Her name was Candelaria. And we know that she made rag dolls for the girls. Not this one, but probably a similar
probably it's all like
And
torn up.
Candelaria was a famous Chumash basket weaver.
I see.
And so her baskets are in museums in Europe, and there is one down at the Mission Museum.
So you mentioned about that ornaments that made out of human hair.
Yes.
Where can I see that? I mean, you said there's another place away from here that have a bigger display.
Yes. As I recall, I saw this display at the Stratford House
Stratford House.
in Newbury Park.
Is it within the city? Within this county?
It's in the county, but Newbury Park is
Far, far away?
pretty far, you know.
Okay, maybe next time when I drive down.
But you could look, just to see others, you could probably look on the internet.
Yeah, probably.
So the other thing that we have here
St. Mary.
that belong to them is this little embroidered cross. So Rebecca, this belonged to Rebecca, the youngest. And then we have this was a religious family, so
This is
we
the
have
altar.
made this into an altar. But what it actually was a safe that belonged to the last private owner of the house, and I'll tell you about him when we go. That was the room that we went by.
Oh, I see.
But he was a wealthy man, and he had this as a safe.
Let me see.
So there's no running water, so they have pitchers and basins.
Where did they get the water? Do they have a well?
They probably have wells.
Yeah.
And then the Santa Clara River is close by. But I think there were probably wells. So there are pitchers and basins, and then of course they have these chamber pots. And like there's one there. But it's a wealthy family, so they could have had a very fancy little potty chair.
Potty. Okay. But this is donation again, right?
Right. I'm pointing out the things that actually belonged to them. Now, so with 21 children, there was probably always a baby here in this room. And this is how they would keep the hair.
Oh.
They would, comb, they'd have long hair that they'd comb, and then they would store it before they were going to make something.
I see.
This is a shaving table.
Shaving table.
So the men had straight razors, and they could sharpen them. We have there are a lot of lamps here because the electricity didn't come to Ventura until 1912.
Wow.
This was a typical thing that they would have a feather mattress because they would collect the feathers from ducks and then, put them in for a mattress. Here's another thing that belonged to the family. This red trunk is thought to have been a wedding present for Nicholas, the oldest son. This is called a brazier. You could put hot coals in there for heating. And this is a mouse trap. So it doesn't, the mouse goes in here and then he's trapped, but it doesn't kill him.
Oh, okay.
So
So what do they do? They release it?
Doña Teodora would say, get one of the boys, take this out to the field
Let it.
and let it go. And then probably it'd be back the next day. So we have, again in this room, we have a pitcher and basin and a chamber pot. But again, it's a wealthy family. They could have had an adult potty chair.
Oh, yeah, they don't have bathroom.
And this is typical of the 1860s. This bedroom set, this three-piece bedroom set here is from the 1860s.
I see.
The docents purchased that. So we'll come out here, go into the next room. So this room also has two doors.
See, every room has two doors.
No, just the two, these on the ends.
I see. Seems like this is a worship room, huh? Hello.
to tell those people. So we have some things that belong to the Olivas. This little water, a holy water fount here, belonged to them. And we know that they had a chapel because we have this photograph of the chapel.
I see.
And so we've tried to do a reproduction of
But
the.
is this the room where the chapel was? This is the same room where the chapel used to be?
I'm not sure about that because, we're talking about back in the 1800s, and there were another dairy farmer, there was Max Fleischmann, there were other people. So whether this was the actual chapel or not, I don't know. This photograph is only showing, the wall, the ceiling, and so forth. But we've made it into the chapel. So besides the little water, the holy water fountain, this candle holder actually belonged to them. And this picture also belonged to them, but you can see it was deteriorating here.
Yes.
So we made a reproduction to put up there.
I see.
Now, if you remember, I told you that it was called Rancho San Miguel. So this is a picture of Saint Michael here. And then the Saint Nicholas was the patron saint. Also, Saint Nicholas was the oldest boy. The oldest was a girl, but Nicholas was the oldest boy. And Nicholas was the patron saint of the Rancho. So that's called a melodeon or a coupon organ. So back in, I don't know if you remember blue chip stamps or green, okay. So we used to have a system where when people bought things, they would get these stamps and they'd put them in books and collect these stamps. And then you would take the books, depending on how many stamps you had, and you'd turn them into a center and you'd be able to get something, like candle holders or something like that. So, right, that's in my lifetime.
Yeah, they call it the box top. Like now, like you bought like cereals and then on the cover, the box itself, you just cut down the box top and you collect it. When you collect it enough, then you turn it into money.
Okay, so that's so this was long ago when they would collect these coupons, and they must have had to have a lot of them. And you could get one of these coupon organs.
Wow.
So maybe you could buy them also, I don't know. If the Olivas family had one, they would have gotten it from the sailing ship up in Santa Barbara when they bartered for things.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so we'll go out. Herb garden, and every rancho would have had an herb garden because there's no drugstore around to go if you have a headache to buy aspirin. You'd have to go out and get some. If you had a sore throat, you could get horehound, or if you just, were feeling stressful, you could have some chamomile tea. And so every rancho would have had, they had to be self-sufficient. So anyway, things are going good for the Olivases. They've in 1849, gold was discovered in California. And so, as I mentioned, Don Raimundo's a smart businessman, and he knows it's too difficult to go up there and look for gold and not find it. But he had something that he knew the hungry miners needed. So he took the cattle up and sold the cattle for beef for them. And he made a lot of money that way because he was doing well with taking the hides to Santa Barbara and bartering. But when he took them up to the gold mines, he was getting a lot of money for every cattle, and he was being paid in gold.
Wow.
So he became the fourth wealthiest man in Ventura. And so, they were doing very well. Well, in 1860, there were a lot of floods. And, we're up here we're on a hill here. So the water might have, come up, but the house didn't affect the house. And whereas other ranchos, the flooding did a tremendous, that would wash cattle out. So a lot of people were really hurt by the floods. And then in the 1870s, the weather turned, there were a lot of droughts. And so everything was dried. The cattle, they didn't want to eat this dried stuff. And so the cattle business really went down. Again, he's a smart businessman. He brings in sheep and they eat. And then he starts renting out different plots of land so that other people would be growing things. So again, they're doing fine. Now, his partner, Lorenzano, they had gotten the land grant together and they had split it. Well, he couldn't make it, so he had to sell his ranch. But Don Raimundo, he's doing well, but just before his 70th birthday, he got sick with tuberculosis and died. And so he left everything to his beloved wife, Doña Teodora. Well, there were 14 children that were upset about that. They took her to court and they said, she can't do this. She can't run this. We need to have our share. So the judge ruled in their favor and the place was divided. Doña Teodora got the house and 300 acres. And then Rebecca, the youngest child, she and her husband and family came to live with Doña Teodora. And Doña Teodora lived then until about 1895. And she was over 80, so when she died. So then Rebecca and her family were here. And they had it until 1899, and then the 300 acres, I guess they couldn't make it, and so they sold the property. So the second owner was an Alvord family, and they were dairy farmers. They put in the connecting doors. You and I, we went out one door and into the other. I never took you through because the connecting doors weren't in until this Alvord family moved here. So they had the property not too long because in 1912, 1913, some Guatemalan doctors owned the property. And I don't think they lived here. I think they probably bought it for speculation. Then it turned over and was a gun club, and then it started to deteriorate. Eventually, it belonged to a bank.
Oh. And how did it become a museum as today?
Yeah, well, I'm getting there.
I'm sorry.
So then it was, run down. It was in bad shape. But a wealthy man named Major Max Fleischman saw it and really. So this is a picture. This is a picture of Max, and this is his wife Sarah. And then we have another picture over here of him. And this is his yacht, the Haida. So we had a lot of yachts. But these people were extremely wealthy. They traveled all over. They had a lot of money. They had a house in Santa Barbara. They had a house at Lake Tahoe. They had a house in New York on Long Island. And so anyway, he sees this and he thinks, oh, well, I think this will be great for duck hunting. Well, duck hunting was only from October to December, 3 months. So they would come down here from Santa Barbara for a few days to go duck hunting. This picture here was his favorite hunting dog, and Sarah had that picture made for him. Well, if they're only here for a few days, out of a few months, they had to have somebody watching the property here. So they had a family, Iva and her husband Reader, and they lived here for 25 years. And they lived probably in that little Adobe, and they took care. They were the caretakers. And Iva had just carte blanche at one of the stores downtown. She could go and get the best of meat when they came to make wonderful hamburgers or whatever. And Sarah loved her lima bean soup. So that was what they did here. They didn't stay here very long. They had caretakers. And then in the 50s, Max got very ill and he felt he better prepare. So he set up a foundation that would take care of Sarah. They didn't have any children. And so he wanted Sarah to be taken care of when he died. And when she died, then this foundation was to distribute his money. And so that's how the city of Ventura got the property. They were given the property from the foundation. And they decided then to put the house back into the original time frame. And we then, but this furniture here, all of this belonged to Max Fleischman, and it was here when the city got the property. So we have this room dedicated to him. He was a marvelous philanthropist, and that's why we have the property.